Opening credits. A blended family Christmas. A short story. Eugeena Patterson, short book number 2. Written by Tyora Moody. Narrated by Diana Rhodes. Chapter 1. 7 Days Before Christmas. I'm not sure how our Christmas shopping got so off track. I suspected my daughter Lisa and new daughter-in-law Carmen had something to do with my current predicament. Both women had been grinning way too much for me this morning. It was 8:30 on a Saturday morning, and neither one of these young women were that enthusiastic about starting weekend errands before 12 o'clock noon. Now, I was excited about Christmas shopping as much as the next person, but I was not looking forward to being around crowds. The shopping trip wasn't too bad, since I managed to pick up some toys for my 3 grandchildren above age 6. They were old enough to slip me hints. The other 2 grands that were under age 3 weren't that hard to please either. This grandma did a good job of her Christmas list. Yes, I did. When we turned toward the corner to head towards the food court, my suspicions were confirmed that something was up. My Aunt Cora popped up from the bench and waved at us. Cora was my father's youngest sister. Interestingly, she was 2 years older than me. We were more like sisters and talked a few times a week. Funny, when we talked on the phone yesterday, Cora didn't mention she was coming to meet us for Christmas shopping. I eyed all 3 women. What's going on? Cora grinned and winked conspiratorially at the other 2 women. We have a surprise for you. With that statement, I found myself whisked away by 3 family members into a bridal boutique of all places. A few months ago, I had been planning Carmen's wedding to my middle son, Cedric. We stood in this same boutique, watching her try on dresses. This time, I wasn't the wedding planner. I was the bride. Still, a wedding dress was not anywhere on my Christmas shopping list. I wasn't ready for this. My beau, Amos Jones, only proposed less than 2 months ago. While I accepted, I wasn't in a hurry to get married. I mean, the man was my next-door neighbor. I saw him almost every day. A few years ago, I was unhappy about my empty nest, especially with my husband passing away. I'd never really experienced living alone before, and I didn't like it. Not one bit. But that all changed the first summer of my retirement from teaching. It was unfortunate, but my life was flipped upside down when I found the dead body of a dear friend in my home. Since that horrific day, my life hasn't been dull. In fact, I stumbled upon one predicament, or should I say, one crime after another. Despite my protest that this wedding planning was all too soon, I stood inside a dressing room facing a 3-way mirror. I pulled the second wedding dress over my body, quite thankful to see it fit. The first one didn't even make it over my hips. That was truly a sad sight to behold in 3 mirrors at the same time. Do You Hear What I Hear was playing over the boutique speakers. Normally, I loved listening to Whitney Houston's version, but my mind was wrapped up in my current state, with my holiday mood being smothered by satin and lace. I see why young people threaten to elope. At my age, that seemed like the better choice. Maybe I should run this by Amos. I always loved hearing his stories about being in Vegas, and I'd never been. I let out a breath, scrutinizing myself in the 3-way mirror. I was one of those people who could never hide their true feelings from their face. Sure enough, my nose was turned up as if I smelled something bad. Lord Jesus, help me. That was all the prayer I could muster, though I'm pretty sure I knew the answer. This wasn't the dress. Now, if I was 40 years younger, with more of an hourglass shape, maybe. This was the season for miracles, but I was a realist. A knock at the dressing room door broke my intense concentration. A shrill voice asked, "How are the dresses working for you, Mrs. Patterson?" I sighed and rubbed my hands down the silky material. I had asked the attendant to help me select off-white dresses. I was a woman of age, and this was my second go-round at a wedding. The color was perfect. I turned to view the sides of my current selection again, as if I needed to make sure it wasn't the one. Who was I fooling? I had an uphill battle with my weight all my life. But thanks to a type 2 diabetes diagnosis, I'd lost 40 pounds in the last 2 years. Some months I'd struggle with the scale, agonizing over gaining and then rejoicing over lost pounds. But I'd never fully gotten rid of the rolls around my waist. And this dress was unforgivable. Keep it simple, Eugeena. I called out to the attendant. The first 2 aren't going to make the cut. I think I will try the next one. I slipped out of the dress, thankful that I thought to put on my spandex for extra support. A big girl still needed all the help she could get. I hung the dress on the hanger and slipped the door open. Here you go. You can return these 2 to the rack. My attendant's name was Barbie. She was blonde and blue-eyed like a doll. Barbie beamed as she looped the 2 dresses over her arm. I hope the next one works. You have some impatient ladies out there waiting to see you. She winked. I sighed deeply. I know. At times, Lisa, Carmen, and Cora seemed more excited than me. It's not that I wasn't looking forward to my upcoming nuptials. I was still kind of stunned. Whenever someone referred to me as a bride, I felt several emotions all at once. One being disbelief. At 61, I was about to be married again. All of my life, I've only known one man. But God had found someone else for me. I, Eugeena Patterson, had fallen in love with a very good-looking senior citizen. I often wondered what would have happened if Amos and I stumbled upon each other earlier in life. But then I had to remember, while my previous marriage had its ups and downs, the relationship had spawned 3 adult children and 5 grandchildren. Ralph Patterson passed on 5 years ago. We had many troubled years, but I have to say, the last few years, before the heart attack took Ralph from this world, were some of the most memorable moments. It was like the Lord wanted us to make peace with each other and the life we had tried to have, but often failed. Our union began when I was barely out of high school. Let's just say it wasn't voluntary. Me, being what old folks termed fast in the tail, managed to get pregnant at 17. My dad encouraged the shotgun wedding. Now, I can't say I remember seeing a shotgun, but Cora claimed that her oldest brother, my father, visited the Patterson home, and he wasn't empty-handed. Cora was also known to exaggerate. Before God and everyone, Ralph and I said our vows. Soon after, he started college and then attended medical school. Many years later, between raising the boys, I completed my bachelor's degree in elementary education. Our life centered around Ralph Jr. and Cedric. Well, at least my life did. Dr. Patterson's second home was the hospital, where he was the beloved obstetrician, assisting hundreds of babies into the world. Later, when we had our surprise baby, Lisa, I started to see Ralph soften and become more of a father. The daddy's girl syndrome. But as our children grew older, Ralph and I continued to grow apart. I even thought about the D word, but why rock the boat? Who really lived happily ever after? While my mind whipped me with thoughts of my past marriage, I slipped on this next dress. I looked into the mirror, turning from side to side. This dress was just below the knee, not as long as the previous one. The shimmering material felt good next to myself. I smiled at myself because, what do you know, I kind of felt slimmer in this dress. The fabric flared out from my waist, making me want to spin like a little girl. Was this the dress? They say three's the charm. I eased the door open to see Barbie's expectant face. Her bright red lips stretched into a grin. The look on your face says you like this one. I suddenly had something in my throat and struggled to clear it. Yes, let's see what the ladies say. Barbie led me out to where the women in my family waited for me. The first person's face I saw light up was Cora. Her face had grown thinner from caring for her older sister and my only other living aunt. It was amazing how the oldest and the youngest siblings were the only ones left. Her eyes shone with tears. She mouthed to me, "You look beautiful." Her response pleased me. Cora had been especially pushy about me planning a real wedding. Since she attended the first one, she remembered I didn't have the ideal wedding. She told me, "Eugeena, you have a second chance, and you love Amos. Do this wedding the way you really wanted to as a little girl. Leave it to Cora to remember my dreams of long ago." Dreams that had been forgotten. My aunt had never been married or had children. This was also very much a dream of hers that had long faded. On each side of Cora was Lisa and Carmen. Both young women broke into squeals like two teens at a concert. "Mama, I love the dress," Lisa clapped. Carmen nodded. "Miss Eugeena, Amos is gonna love this dress." I couldn't help but beam as I strutted. That's right, I sashayed up to the 3 mirrors. The more I walked in that dress, the more I loved it. I really do like it. Nope, wait. I stepped back and twirled. Yep, I spun around and managed to make myself dizzy. I turned back to the group as if I was on that show, Yes to the Dress. "I believe we can check the dress off the list." More squeals and hoots greeted me from the group. Barbie whisked me off to the seamstress. I stood as still as my quivering body would allow as a Korean woman poked pins in the dress. She smiled as she snipped around my curves with her pins. "We will make you beautiful for your big day." I peered at her name tag, which read Kim Chun Hai. I winked at her. "Kim, you gonna help an old lady out? Make me look young?" The seamstress gave me a toothy grin. "You look young. Love make you young." I practically giggled. I don't giggle. Almost 10 minutes later, with the dress in the hands of the seamstress and back in my regular clothes, Carmen said, "Miss Eugeena, we should grab something to eat. We were in the boutique for a long time." Carmen being a doctor and Cora being a retired nurse, were both conscious of me taking care of myself. "You're right. I don't need my blood sugar to drop." Carmen and Lisa chatted as Cora and I followed behind on the way to Carmen's car. As I climbed into the back seat, my phone buzzed inside my pocketbook. I reached for the iPhone and noticed it was Amos. I felt the grin on my face as I answered the phone. "Hey, Amos. You'll never guess where these women took me today." Amos cleared his throat. "I can't wait to hear about your adventures." There was a gruffness in his voice. Amos wasn't an emotional man, but something was affecting his vocal cords, and I could tell something was wrong. My smile faltered a bit. "Everything okay?" "Yes. I wanted to let you know that Alexa, my oldest daughter, agreed to fly home for Christmas." My throat felt as if it would close up. I choked out, "Amos, that's wonderful." Amos had 2 daughters, and I knew how much this meant to him. While I remember seeing the girls around when Amos's wife was alive, neither daughter visited after their mother's funeral. Francine Jones passed 3 years ago, after she had lost her battle with breast cancer. Amos felt the girls were still sore at him for being a busy homicide detective, always spending time on a case instead of being a part of their lives. I tried to convince him the girls, with one in Seattle and the other in California, were probably just busy and it was expensive traveling from coast to coast. Amos responded, "Yeah, I finally get to see my grandson too. It's been a long time." Praise the Lord! Amos hadn't seen his grandson in person since he was 4 years old, and the boy was now 7. They kept in touch via video chats, but I knew Amos wanted more contact. I often wondered why Amos didn't take off and move to the West Coast to be closer to his family. I would have been heartbroken if he did. "What about Brianna?" I asked Amos. "Have you heard from her?" The baby. The one Amos mentioned was spoiled and rebellious as a teenager. She dropped out of college and headed to California to make it as a singer. The one most affected by the loss of her mother. "No, Alexa mentioned she hadn't heard from her either." Amos responded, "Brianna will call. This is going to be the best Christmas yet." His deep, throaty laugh poured low over the phone, but I sensed the trepidation of the coming weeks in his response. As I ended the call, Carmen reached over and turned up the radio. "Isn't this one of your favorites, Miss Eugeena?" Darlene Love's voice belted out. "Lots of people around. Christmas. Baby, please come home. Christmas." From the car speakers, once again, another holiday song took on another source of meaning for me. My family wasn't perfect, and there were moments when I felt my children shut me out. But we were family, and I knew I could count on them to reach out to me and each other. If I had to put my finger on what really bothered me about my pending nuptials to Amos, it was the fact that Amos seemed closer to my family than his. I didn't know him back during his time on the police force, but I knew solving crimes, especially homicide, was stressful. He wasn't able to be present for his family. Amos had softened with retirement, and I knew his girls would appreciate the man he had become. They needed to give him a chance. Before I walked down the aisle with their father, I needed to know that we could truly blend our families. Chapter 2. 5 days before Christmas. Now that I knew one of Amos's daughters and her son was going to join us for Christmas, I needed to work on the menu for our Christmas meal. Even though Amos hadn't heard from his youngest daughter, I wanted to be sure I addressed everyone's favorites. Amos and I always spent breakfast together, usually at my house. Monday morning, after I cleared the dishes, I knew I had to grill Amos on some of the dishes his first wife made during the holidays. Him and Porgy were outside, so I had to wait until Man and the dog finished their outing. I had inherited the Porgy 2 years ago when I found my friend's deceased body. Mary had loved that dog, and he was her only family. My first husband, Ralph, simply didn't tolerate animals. I wasn't sure if I kept the dog because of Mary, or if I was really that lonely at the time. Porgy had become as much a part of my family as my children and my grandchildren. Since Amos was over all the time, the dog was quite taken with him. Porgy had munched on his kibbles in the corner as we ate breakfast. Sensing we were finished, he whined and made circles in front of the back door. Amos let him out and stood outside until he finished. Both males were back inside, with Porgy heading to the living room where I had one of his many beds in the house. The bed in the living room was near a window where sunlight pooled in casting a nice, warm, sunny spot. Seated together at the kitchen table, I patiently waited for Amos to take another swig of coffee before answering my question. "I appreciate you going through all the trouble, Eugeena. Really, all I remember is both girls loved Francine's macaroni and cheese. She made a real mean sweet potato pie. We all loved it." Amos appeared wistful. Then his face turned grim. He shook his head as if chasing memories away. "The holidays are stressful enough. Don't go through any extra trouble." I frowned. "Why not? I want your girls to feel welcome." Amos grimaced. "I'm pretty sure Alexa mentioned a few times that she's vegan." "Vegan? Oh, that would be quite different." I grinned. "Okay. Well, you know, I'm all for healthy cooking. I'm sure there's something I could make that she would like. I've read that vegans use sweet potatoes in recipes. Why don't you ask her about some dishes?" Amos appeared skeptical. "Okay." Then it occurred to me, and the thought made my heart leap in my chest. I eyed Amos. "Did you mention to your daughters that this is a family gathering that includes both the Jones and Pattersons?" I watched Amos visibly swallow. Panic started to set in my chest. "Did you even mention to them about the marriage proposal? About me? Your next-door neighbor's soon-to-be wife?" He gave me a deer-in-the-headlights look. "Eugeena, it was enough to get them to come. Remember, I only heard back from Alexa. I figured we could make an official announcement when everyone was here." "Announcement?" My family knew Amos had proposed. In fact, he asked me during Cedric and Carmen's wedding reception. To prove he was serious and not caught up in the moment, he presented me with a real diamond ring the next day. I peered down at that ring now. Suppose they notice the ring. You know one of my children is going to slip up and say something." He shook his head. "Give me some time. I will talk to Alexa after she arrives. She's a reasonable woman. I'm sure she will be fine with the marriage." "So, you will prepare her after she arrives?" He nodded. His plan made sense. This wasn't the kind of news you shared over the phone. Still, I'm not sure why I felt nervous. Amos and I were not getting any younger. Both of us had been widows for some time. The Bible said 2 were better than 1. There certainly was enough data to confirm that loneliness affected older people at an alarming rate. Would there really be any objections to Amos getting married again? Lisa hit it off well with Amos from the beginning. Both of my sons were a little squeamish, but eventually Junior and Cedric came around and seemed to like that I had a new man in my life. The one sore point that remained was that Amos still had not heard from his youngest daughter. I cleared my throat, knowing that it was bothering him. "Still no word from Brianna?" "No. Alexis called last night. She was really worried. Apparently, her and Brianna had an argument a few months ago. She hasn't heard from her sister since late August." I gripped my fingers together. "Not one word? No email or text?" Amos sighed deeply. She said she's seen her post some things on Facebook. And what's the other place young people use?" "Instagram," I offered. "Yeah, she's always posting pictures of herself." I nodded. "Selfies?" He waved. Amos could care less about social media. He only had a Facebook account so he could see photos of his grandson. "Anyway, Alexis says she seems to be all right, but she's not responding to her calls." The argument was that bad between them? They are family, and the only siblings. I know. Alexa's really upset about it. She didn't go into details, but it sounded like Brianna was asking for money. Again, even though Alexa makes a good salary as a psychiatrist, she has a child, and Douglas needs things. Apparently, since the divorce, she can't depend on his father to always come through with child support. She tried to explain that to her younger sister. I pondered for a while on what Amos told me. Finally, I asked, "Didn't you tell me Francine left both girls money?" He nodded. "Yes. Alexa put her money away for Douglas's college fund. I'm thinking Brianna blew through hers. She left school while Francine was going through chemo. After her mother died, Brianna took off. At first, she lived with Alexa for a while. Then, Alexa started having trouble with her marriage, and Brianna moved to California." "To become a singer?" He sighed deeply as if his breath pained him. She's talented, but we always expressed to her to get an education. Brianna enjoyed working with kids. The early education track seemed like a good fit for her. I could see her teaching preschoolers. It's what her mother did for years. Francine loved teaching the little ones, until her body wouldn't let her anymore." I smiled. Amos's first wife and I were both teachers, with me choosing to teach at middle school. I reached over and covered Amos's hand. "Brianna will reach out. The holidays are hard, and I know it has to be especially difficult to not have their mother around. I'm praying that our families coming together will be the start of something new. I can't replace Francine, just like you can't replace Ralph. But I've seen how my children have embraced you. It makes me even more grateful for this time of year and the opportunity for more memories." Amos squeezed my hand back. "That's what I want, Eugeena. I want a second chance. I want to be there for my daughters and my grandson." I hugged Amos and walked him to the door. Once I closed my door, I realized I needed advice. I started to call Cora. Then I thought, I needed more than just Cora for this one. I needed a family session. Chapter 3. A Family Session. While I was a mother and a grandmother, I was humble enough to know I didn't know everything. Yeah, we got older and wiser, but there was always someone who knew more than us. I arrived at my aunt's house about 35 minutes after talking to Amos. When most of the family was still living, Aunt Esther and Cora's house was where we gathered for the holidays and family reunions. Once owned by my grandparents, The home had been in our family since I was a little girl. Growing up, the house was a pale yellow. In later years, I remember it being a baby blue. I don't remember whose idea it was to paint this house Pepto-Bismol pink. It didn't seem to bother Esther or Cora, but no one coming down the street could miss this house. I knocked on the door and waited. Cora opened it. "Girl, you didn't tell me you was coming today. What's wrong?" I stepped through the door as she stepped back. "I have a bit of an emergency." Smells of apple pie and nutmeg spice lingered in the foyer, guiding me inside to the living room. My aunts had already started baking their apple pie. The house was warm, and as soon as I entered the living room, Johnny Mathis' voice greeted me with, "Sleigh bells ring, are you listening? In the lane, snow is glistening." A beautiful sight. I've always loved that song, even though I rarely ever saw snow on Christmas here in Charleston, South Carolina. In the South, there had been holidays where you showed up with Christmas presents wearing short pants. So many memories in this house soothed me. With my childhood of long ago front and center in my mind, I almost forgot why I came to see my aunts. My eyes traveled to an area in the living room where many, many years ago, a large silver tree adorned the corner. Now, a more modern evergreen tree, though not the real kind, was decorated with gifts underneath. "Eugeena," a strong melodic voice floated from a recliner in the living room. My Aunt Esther's long legs were covered with a quilt, but her feet stuck out from over the chair. Most of the women in my family were average in height, like me. Aunt Esther was the tallest of all the women. She was a regal woman who carried herself with pride. Despite her 80 years, she appeared like a queen on a throne to me. Respect. Just then, the Queen of Soul, Aretha's voice wafted through the room, singing her rendition of the Christmas song. "Hey, Auntie." I bent down and kissed Esther's forehead. Her cropped silver hair was covered with a bright red scarf. Next to her chair was her worn brown leather King James Bible. I honestly believed my aunt had that Bible since I was a young woman, and that it's been a long time. The pages were barely intact and sticking out in various places. "How's the bride-to-be?" My aunt grinned. Like Cora, though never married, Esther loved to attend weddings. The only time my oldest living aunt ever left the house these days was for a wedding or a funeral. I eyed my youngest aunt. "I guess Cora filled you in on the wedding dress." Esther smiled. "She did. I can't wait to see you. I remember that old dress we found for you when you married Ralph. I believe it was the dress Mama had worn." "Really? How come I never knew that?" Esther laughed. "Girl, you were probably too scared to remember. My, you and Ralph made a good life. Had Junior, Cedric, and then surprised everyone with Lisa. I remember I was so glad to see you finally get a girl." I chuckled. "Lisa has been quite the handful ever since. I love her and my grandbabies. I'm glad they live here in Charleston." Esther fiddled with her quilt, pulling it over her feet. "What about Amos? Has he any kids with his first wife?" I don't know how, but Esther and Cora always had this weird way of knowing the topic of conversation before I could even voice it. I swallowed. "He has 2 daughters. He hasn't had the best relationship with them since their mom died." Cora walked into the room. She came in with mugs on a tray. "Sorry to interrupt. This time of day, Esther likes tea." Esther grumbled. "What I really want is some strong black coffee, but my sister has talked me into this green tea concoction." Cora rolled her eyes. "It's good for you." Esther sighed. "I'm too old to worry about what's good for me." With shaky hands, she took the mug that Cora held out and took a sip. She made a face and placed the mug next to her Bible on the table. My aunt turned to me. "So how does Amos's daughters feel about this marriage?" Cora, who had been looking at her sister's distaste of the green tea, turned her eyes to me. "I thought you said the girls were coming for Christmas." I was starting to question why I came over here to talk to these 2 ladies. I was already anxious. I took a deep breath to calm my nerves. Yes, I asked Amos to invite the girls home for Christmas so the families could properly meet. If you recall, Amos's family moved in a few months after Ralph passed, so they never really met my family. I can't say I was very neighborly at the time. Esther asked, when did you and Amos start talking? I racked my brain. I can't say when I really noticed him. I did go to his wife's funeral. I remember seeing his daughters next to him. I think one day he came to the door a few months after his wife had passed. He asked me if I needed help in the yard. You know, Cedric isn't always reliable with his time being spent on call for the hospital. I told Amos I would love to have his help. I wanted to pay him, but he refused. Esther's eyes were focused on something beyond me. As if she was dreaming, she finally commented, "It was meant to be." "What?" I asked. Cora laughed. "Oh, you and Amos, silly woman." I leaned back in the seat as both my aunts had a good laugh. Then they both turned serious. Esther quirked her eyebrows at me. "What's wrong? Are you changing your mind? Amos is a good man. Believe me, I have plenty of proposals. None of those men met the same standard as Amos. I'm not nervous, nor am I planning to break my engagement with Amos. I'm worried about his family. Alexa, his oldest, is definitely coming with his son, but she doesn't know Amos has proposed, and he can't get a response back from his youngest, Brianna." We all remained silent for a while. Esther attempted to swallow her green tea. She shook her head and put it back. Cora rolled her eyes again. "Fine. I will brew you some coffee, woman." Esther rolled her eyes. "It's about time." I watched as Cora cleared off the mug and headed towards the kitchen. "Eugeena?" Esther grabbed my attention. "Yes, ma'am. You can't let anyone steal your happiness. Amos's daughters will accept you. You know why?" I couldn't help but grin. "Tell me, Auntie." She leaned forward. "Because you are a woman of God. You raised your family and you remained devoted to your husband until he died. You are there for your grown children and grandchildren. You work at the church and you continue to be of service to your community with the school children. If they're looking for a woman to meet their standards," she pointed her long bony finger towards me, "you bypass all requirements." Esther leaned back. "You're making a way to bring two families together for Christmas. This is the time of year for love and reconciliation. All of them have probably been stubborn all this time, both Amos and his daughters. I bet the wife was the peacemaker in the family." I shook my head. "There's no doubt that Francine Jones was the glue in that family." Esther nodded. "You're the new bottle of glue." I laughed. Esther had been a school teacher, too. Us teachers knew about the bottles of glue and all the other school supplies. "What therefore God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Esther addressed me with the Bible verse. Her hands had reached toward the old leather Bible next to her. She didn't lift it up, but laid her hands on it. Her brown eyes were sharp as she drilled a look into me. Her fierce features were replaced by a warm smile. "Trust God, Eugeena. Don't fret. We can't change or make nothing happen with worry." I nodded. "I know. I just really want Amos to hear from Brianna, and I want both girls to feel like they're home." Esther nodded. "It will all work out." She lifted her finger again. "Even if it seems like it's not going to be what you think, trust God for that miracle. This is the season, girl. This is the season." I couldn't argue with that. Miracles were taking place with Alexa and her son arriving in 2 days. I prayed Brianna would call Amos and that she would also come. Whatever happened by the time Christmas Day arrived, I knew it would be okay. It may have been because I was sitting in my aunt's home, a home where I'd seen so much heartache and miracles over the years, but I felt peaceful, that peace that you don't really understand why you feel it. It's exactly what I needed. I didn't know at the time how much I would need to hang tight to that peace. Chapter 4. Tangled Christmas Lights. When I arrived back home from visiting with my aunts, I saw Amos out in the front yard. There were boxes sitting on the porch steps, and he seemed to be wrestling with something in his hands. It was such a sight, I burst out laughing. What was this man doing? Didn't he see how silly he looked? I parked my Camry in front of the garage and climbed out. Amos, I called as I rounded the back of the car to walk through the path that led from my house to his home. It was a path that Amos made a year ago. Our properties had been separated by shrubbery, but us old folks really didn't need to walk all the way around and up the sidewalk just to get to each other's house. I still did my walks around the neighborhood for exercise. Going to visit Amos's wasn't a part of that walk. As I marched up to him, I finally glimpsed what had him looking like he was doing some weird arm dance in front of the yard. "Christmas lights?" I inquired. "I don't think I've ever seen you put up Christmas lights." Amos grunted. "Not in this house. When the girls were younger, I decorated the house every year until we moved down here." I crossed my arms. "I see." That's when I noticed the ladder laying on the ground. "Do you think you should be climbing?" Amos eyed me. "I got this, Eugeena." I know, but..." He frowned. "What are you trying to say?" I placed my hand on my hip. This was no time for male ego tripping. "That your daughters are coming, and it would help if they didn't have to visit you in the hospital." Amos's thick eyebrows furrowed, and his lips clamped up tight. "Ooh, not good, Eugeena, not good. So much for sharing the peace I just acquired. Look, I'm just saying that maybe you could use some help. Let me call Cedric and he can be your backup." Amos dropped the lights back in the box and grumbled. "Fine." I reached in my purse and pulled out my phone, hoping Cedric would be willing to help his mama out. I remembered the number of times Cedric climbed the tree in our backyard, and when Ralph couldn't help, Cedric was the one to help put up the Christmas lights long ago. I followed Amos into the house as Cedric picked up. "Hey, Mama, what's up?" "I was hoping you had some time to help Amos with something at the house." "Sure, it's my day off. Carmen had me out this morning doing some Christmas shopping, but I'm just hanging around the house now." "Good. Amos needs help with putting the lights up outside." I peered over at Amos, who was bent over a large box in the living room. You know, just to back him up while he's on the ladder. I needed it to sound good while Amos was obviously listening. "Yeah, I can do that. I'll be over in about 15 minutes. "Good. Thank you, son." I switched off the phone. "Cedric said he can come by." Amos nodded. "Thanks. I appreciate it." His voice trailed off. I walked up beside him and looked down at the box. "Is that a Christmas tree?" Amos swung his hands around his sides. "Yeah. It's been out in the shed all this time." I understood the moment he said shed. I'd been in the shed a few times. It was jam-packed with memories, all lined up in neatly stacked boxes. Now that I thought about it, I'd never seen Amos put up a Christmas tree either. This would be the first year in a long time. I grabbed his hand. "You need some help." "You helped me get our Christmas tree up Thanksgiving night." He smiled. "That was a lot of fun. When Francis was alive, we did the same thing. After Thanksgiving dinner, we put up the tree. I purchased a real Christmas tree one year. Man, that was a mess. Needles everywhere." We both laughed. Now, a real Christmas tree is something we never had. I've had a few silver ones. Amos smiled. "This one is silver." I sucked in a breath. "Really?" I moved over to the box and flipped open the top. Just like Amos said, it was silver. I pulled out a branch. "Oh, it's so full and beautiful. We have to get this out of the box right now." By the time I had taken out half the branches, it occurred to me that Amos was still behind me. I stood up from the box. "Amos, is everything okay?" He was quiet for a moment. "Sorry, I'm just feeling overwhelmed. We could do this another time, but my girls," he finished. I brightened. "Did you hear from Brianna?" He shook his head. No, but Alexa saw her post a picture on that Graham place. I smiled. Instagram. He walked over to the table and grabbed his phone. I watched as he pressed buttons. Alexa sent me this link. Here, he handed me his phone. I saw that the link was in an email addressed to him. The text above said, Dad, look what Rihanna posted on her Instagram today. Do you remember this photo? I looked at Amos before clicking on the link. I'd seen photos of Alexis and Brianna before. Amos had photos of his family here in the living room that showed the girls at various ages up until their graduation. This was the first recent photo of Brianna I'd seen. In her profile photo, she had dreadlocks that were colored blonde at the ends. She had a bright smile and shared the same complexion as Amos. She was the female version of Amos. I looked at the photo that her sister was referring to. It was a Christmas picture with Amos, Francine, and both girls. In the background was a large silver tree, and I smiled. When was this taken? Amos had sat on the couch. I believe Alexis was 10 and Brianna was 6. I remember it was the year before I made detective. I was still a cop working the streets. I sat on the couch next to Amos, the tree in the box forgotten for now. As he traveled down memory lane, I knew he shared these memories alone the past few Christmases, and I didn't want to spoil the easy flow in which he shared them with me now. He continued, I bought both girls bikes that year. Alexa had a red one and Brianna had a purple one. I spent all night putting those bikes together. It was a great time. Good Christmas. Once I became a detective, everything changed. It was something I wanted to become for so long. I remember the following Christmas after this one in that photo. I didn't make it home until late. I rubbed his shoulder. The girls are adult women now. One with a son. You can make new memories. Yeah. Did you read what Brianna added with the photo? I'd been concentrating on the photo and hadn't noticed the caption. I read it. Best Christmas ever. I haven't been into Christmas anymore after this one. Ouch. Seeing Amos's pain, I swallowed. You took this stuff out of the shed because you want to make this a Christmas to remember. Amos absently nodded. Is that even possible if Brianna isn't willing to come home? I heard a car pull up outside. That's probably Cedric. I'm going to give you a piece of advice I was given today. Amos looked at me. His eyes were brimming with unshed tears. He turned and quickly wiped his face. I gently touched his shoulder. Trust God. It's the season for miracles. Chapter 5. 2 days before Christmas. Alexa and Douglas were arriving later this afternoon from Seattle. Amos' nervousness was palpable that morning. As we shared breakfast, Cedric had assisted Amos with stringing Christmas lights in front of the house. It took a trip to Target to get replacement bulbs, but it turned out beautiful. Amos had turned the lights on every night. Despite a few grumbles about the pending electric bill coming, I'd caught a smile on his face each night as he marveled at the sight. Not many people did Christmas lights in the neighborhood, so his house stood out. That day, Carmen apparently wanted to tag along with Cedric, so she and I worked on setting up the Christmas tree inside the house. By the time we were finished, we sat in Amos's kitchen for a change, chowing down on pizza. I'm not normally a pizza eater, but I was so hungry I was willing to eat anything. Well, not anything. I picked off the anchovies and olives. Those things made my taste buds revolt. While we ate, Alexa had called Amos with her travel plans. That was 2 days ago. I volunteered to ride with Amos to the Charleston International Airport, but he thought it was best if he picked them up on his own. There was still no word from Brianna, but I was happy that Amos was going to have some family home for the holidays. Alexa was the oldest and the logical one. I prayed when Amos told her about the pending marriage that she'd accept it and be happy for her dad. In the back of my mind, I wondered if Alexa wouldn't. What would that do for Amos and I? I didn't want that kind of tension hanging over us. It was late afternoon and Amos had left an hour ago. His family was slated to land at the airport around 3:38 p.m. As I wrapped gifts, I peeked out my front window for what seemed like 10 minutes in anticipation of Amos's arrival. Instead of his truck, he drove his wife's car. The Cadillac sat in the garage most of the time. The times I'd been in the car, it still felt and even smelt like Francine Jones. Her perfume, all these years later, still permeated the upholstery. I was on the verge of starting to bite my fingernails, something I hadn't done since I was much younger, when Porgy began barking. He'd been curled up napping. I squinted through my translucent curtain in time to see the Cadillac swerve into Amos's driveway. I really wanted to walk out on my porch, but I made myself stand at the window like some stalker. Amos climbed out of the car. I couldn't read the expression on his face. It wasn't grim, but he seemed solemn. Then I watched as a young boy who seemed a little taller than my granddaughter popped out of the car. He ran up beside Amos. I touched my hand to my chest as I watched a smile spread across Amos's face. Whatever he was feeling before had faded away as he looked down at his only grandchild. I was so entranced with watching grandfather and grandson that I almost missed his mother. Alexa must have been in a trance too, because she stood still by the car, watching her son with her father. I couldn't read the look on her face, but I could only imagine the onslaught of feelings of being back at the house where she lost her mother. I stepped away from the window. Porgy stood with his tail wagging excitedly. I spoke to the dog like he knew what I was saying. "Not now. Amos has company." I pointed my finger at Porgy. "We may not see him tonight. There was a lot to get done tonight anyway. My oldest son and his family would drive down from Greenville tomorrow on Christmas Eve. They always spent the night. I was going to have a packed house with 2 rambunctious twin boys and my granddaughter Jessica, who had just turned 2 years old. Lisa and her 2 children, Keisha and Tyreek, lived in town, so I wasn't expecting them until later tomorrow. Cedric and Carmen would arrive tomorrow too. There were definitely advantages to having my 2 adult children living in Charleston. I hoped Amos could convince Alexa to join us for Christmas Eve with her son. It would help to break the ice and hopefully keep Christmas Day drama-free. One could only hope and pray. I proceeded to spend the next few hours vacuuming, cleaning the bathroom, stripping the linens from the guest beds, and replacing them with my Christmas decor. Years ago, when Aunt Esther and Cora were still quilting, they produced several Christmas quilts. I kept them in protective storage bins. Satisfied that I had done all I could do, I decided it was time to put my feet up for the night. It was already after 7 o'clock. Just as I was wondering how things were going next door, my doorbell rang. Porgy barked, his tail wagging in excitement. I sensed before I opened the door who would be standing on my doorstep. Amos. I grinned. "Hey, I wasn't expecting you tonight. How are things going next door?" That's when I realized Amos wasn't alone. He stepped to the side so I could see Alexa. She stood with her hands on her son's shoulders. Douglas peered up at me and then looked around me. Porgy was whining and shaking with excitement. I shooed the dog away from the door. "Come in." As Amos and his family stepped in, it suddenly occurred to me I'd been cleaning the last few hours, and I wasn't looking my best. Since I was around the house, I'd been wearing an old house dress, and I hadn't touched my hair since this morning, so there was no telling how it looked. Amos could have given his sister some warning. First impressions were important. I closed the door and plastered a smile on my face. I just finished cleaning. I have quite the crew coming tomorrow. I rubbed my hand down the smock and held out my hand. It's good to meet you, Alexa. Please, have a seat. Her smile was trepid, but she reached out to shake my hand. It's good to meet you, Miss Patterson. She sat down on the couch with Amos sitting beside her. You can call me Eugeena. I sat across from Amos and his daughter. I noticed Alexa was dressed in a plushed burgundy sweater that was probably perfect in Seattle, but way too warm for South Carolina. She wore brown high-heeled boots over her jeans. I observed Douglas, who sat next to his mom, but watched Porgy. It's good to meet you too, Douglas. I have twin grandsons who are about your age, who will be here tomorrow. All my grandkids will be here if you're interested in someone to play with while you're visiting with your grandfather. Douglas's eyes shone brightly. Cool. Is that your dog? He asked. Yes, this is Porgy. He's been with me for a few years, and as you can see, he's friendly and always looking to play. Douglas broke away from his mother's side. Can I play? I looked over at Alexa. Sure, she responded to her son with a smile before looking at me. Dougie has always wanted a dog, she added. Douglas knelt down and started petting Porgy. I asked, would you like something to eat? I plan to start the Christmas Eve meal in the morning, but I can whip something up. Amos held out his hand. That's not necessary. I just wanted to make sure Alexis and you met. He pointed to my hand. She knows now. I looked down at my hand where I sported the diamond engagement ring. For a minute, I didn't know what to say. It wasn't like me to be at a loss for words. I cleared my throat. Well, I'm happy you know and that you're here. Amos and I have become dear friends over the past few years. I lost my husband when you all moved here, so we have an understanding as widows. Alexa looked at her father and then at me. I understand, and I'm happy for Dad. I don't want him to be alone. We're so far away. I know I don't reach out as much as I should, but I do worry about him. Amos placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. There's no need to worry. I just want you to know I'm here for you and Dougie anytime. Alexa had a strange smile on her face as she looked at her dad. She turned to me. Her eyes seemed to study me. So, I hear you have a large family. I shook my head. Not too large. I have 2 sons and a daughter. My oldest son will be here with his wife, twin sons and their latest addition, a baby girl. Cedric and Carmen just got married a few months ago, and I'm looking forward to a new addition from them. But they are busy doctors. Then my youngest, Lisa, has a daughter and a son. I felt like I was babbling, but plowed on as if I could somehow make the tension in the room disappear. My aunts will be here Christmas Day. They're the only 2 aunts I have left. In my eyes, there are not as many of us as there used to be, but we're all close. Alexa shook her head as she was trying to absorb all the information I spewed. Well, we're looking forward to meeting everyone. We've had some pretty quiet holidays. I'm sure my dad told you that I divorced Dougie's dad earlier this year. I thought it would be good to come to South Carolina for a change. I shook my head. Certainly. I'm glad to have you both. I snapped my fingers, suddenly remembering. Oh, I did want to run my menu by you. Are you still vegan? Alexa nodded. Yes, but I'm sure I can adapt to what you fix. Are you sure? Tomorrow night I plan to fix shrimp gumbo. Oh. Alexa's eyes grew wide. I don't eat seafood. My heart sank. Okay, I'll find something. She shook her head. Don't go through the trouble. My son will love it. He eats like his dad. He's a growing boy, and I don't try to make him eat what I eat. Okay. Although in the back of my mind, I was going through what I could provide for Alexa to eat. I was determined that she should feel at home. Then it occurred to me, there was still an elephant in the room, still a cause of tension. Have either of you heard from Brianna yet? I asked. I probably should make sure I include her favorites on the menu. Amos exchanged a look with Alexa. Alexa cleared her throat, her face appearing drawn. I heard from Brianna before we left Seattle this morning. She was actually looking to come to my house for Christmas, but I told her that Dougie and I were heading to South Carolina to be with Dad. I exclaimed, "Oh, so she decided to come too?" Alexa sighed deeply. No, she's really angry. My sister's always angry. I don't expect to see her this Christmas. It's probably best. Eugeena, you don't want her around. I'm afraid she would never accept you in my dad's life. I blinked, stunned. I clasped my hands in my lap, not sure how to respond. Alexa stood and turned to her dad. You know, I'm tired. Dougie can stay with you and Eugeena. I'm going to head back to the house and lay down a bit. Sorry, but I could use the break. Amos stuttered as he stood to his feet. His eyes met mine. Sure, Eugeena and I can keep an eye on Dougie. Alexa walked over to her son, who was on the floor with Porgy in his lap. You can hang out with Grandpa. I'll see you later. She hugged her son, despite Porgy being in the way. After Alexa left, the only joy in the room seemed to be with Dougie and Porgy, who had become instant besties. That dog had that effect with all my grandkids. Amos sank back in the seat, looking as weary as I felt. Not knowing what else to say, I said, I'm sorry. He responded sharply. For what? About Brianna. Amos looked over at his grandson. I accepted a long time ago that I messed up the relationship I had with my daughters. I'm grateful Alexa is here. I can only hope that Brianna will come around. He stared at me. But I have a life too, what little left of it. And I'm determined to be happy. He walked over to me and reached his hand out. I took it and stood from the chair. We hugged. I hugged him back as tightly as he hugged me. Despite his words, I still felt a bit of sadness threatening to take over. Chapter 6. Christmas Eve. I entered my kitchen and began pulling out my big pots. This was my favorite time of year. I cooked and baked food that I never did any other time of year. While I saved the big meal until Christmas Day, I still like to serve something for Christmas Eve. This year, I planned a seafood menu, a pot of shrimp gumbo. After talking to Alexa last night before I went to bed, I searched for an alternative vegan version for her. The main thing with vegans was to not include any meat or any dairy ingredients. I already had plenty of the perfect ingredients for sweet potato gumbo. Who knew? In the midst of me chopping sweet potatoes, green peppers, onions, and tomatoes, my phone rang so many times I started to turn it off. I knew I couldn't do that with my eldest son on the road. Junior, also known as Ralph Jr., called me early this morning. My son was a corporate lawyer and had no affinity for sleeping late since he'd grown up. I always found this funny because back in the day, I practically had to drag him out of bed to attend school. Mama, we're packing up the SUV now. We should be there early afternoon. Junior had a large crew that included his wife Judy, twin boys Jacob and Joseph, and the latest addition, my other granddaughter Jessica. That sounds fine, Junior. I did tell you that Amos's daughter would be here. Oh, they came? That's great, Mama. I know you were worried. Well, yes, one of them came. One of them would probably never come to see her dad, and never accept me. I kept that thought to myself. Son, I will see you and the family soon. Drive safely. By the time Junior and his family were at the door, I had quite a few pots going and had managed to stick some sugar cookies in the oven, too. The shrimp gumbo was for dinner, so I made some pigs in a blanket with the leftover andale sausage. I was in my element. I had always loved cooking, which also resulted in my substantial weight gain over the years. Still, there was something joyful about preparing a meal. The decibel level in my house rose each time the doorbell rang, with Lisa and her young children, Keisha and Tyreek, arriving, then followed by the newlyweds, Cedric and Carmen. I was in overdrive in the kitchen by the time Amos arrived with Alexa and Douglas. In fact, the strange drop to quietness alarmed me, and I stepped out of the kitchen. The Pattersons were known for being quite a bunch, so it surprised me when I walked into the living room and all of my children and their spouses seemed to not know how to greet Amos and his daughter. To dissolve the awkwardness, I entered the room. Welcome, Alexa and Douglas. It's so good to have you. I quickly introduced my family, knowing Alexa would eventually learn who was who before she headed back to Seattle. Keisha, who was my little peacemaker, grabbed Douglas by his hand and pulled him to the backyard to play with the other kids. I called out to Lisa and my 2 daughters-in-law to join me in the kitchen. I addressed Alexa. You can come on back in the kitchen. We will leave the living room for the men. Alexa looked shocked, but at the same time, pleased to be pulled into the kitchen. I set the other women to chopping, while I asked Alexa to try out my newest dish. I scooped a bit of the sweet potato gumbo into a bowl for her. She tasted it. When her face lit up, I knew I'd nailed it. This is good. Thank you, Miss Patterson. You really didn't have to go to all this trouble. It's Eugeena and nonsense. Besides, it was good to know I could do another gumbo variation. Carmen spoke up from where she was, chopping celery for the Christmas stuffing. Can I try it? I have thought about going vegan a few times. Before I knew it, all the women were trying out a bowl of sweet potato gumbo. Lisa commented, It's good, Mama, but I prefer your shrimp gumbo. With all that had to get done, I looked up to see Alexa had grown comfortable with the other women. I smiled as they talked amongst themselves about everything from children to careers. A bit of sadness popped up every so often because Amos still had 1 child not included in this gathering. I was whipped by the time dinner eventually rolled around and was too happy to sit down at the table. We were at least 15 minutes into the meal when a buzzing permeated the conversation. At first, I thought it was either Cedric or Carmen being called to the hospital. Alexa spoke up. Sorry, that's me. She picked up her vibrating phone from the table. One glance at the phone, and it was obvious, the way her face fell, that it was not a call she was looking forward to picking up. Excuse me. I glanced over at Amos. He watched his daughter leave the room, his eyebrows creased with worry. So far, the afternoon and the meal had been near perfect. There was some expected awkwardness, but Alexa and Douglas fit in just fine. I knew that had to be somewhat of a relief for Amos. Alexa arrived back at the table, distress on her face. Amos stood. Is everything all right? Alexa looked around the dining table, her eyes falling on me. The pity in her eyes lifted the hairs on my arms. She spoke, her voice hoarse as she turned back to her dad. Brianna's here. Amos stepped from his chair. At the airport? Why didn't she say she was coming? Alexa shook her head. No, she's outside at the house. The meal that had been in motion stopped. I could sense eyes on me from my family. Lisa sat next to me, and uncharacteristically, she touched my hand. While we were in the kitchen, Brianna's name did come up, but we didn't stay on the subject since her missing sister obviously upset Alexa. I stared at Amos. My worry was more for him. For a minute, he seemed to be frozen in place. Then he took off with Alexa at his heels. I heard the front door open and close. I stood. You all continue your meal. I'm gonna grab another plate. I wasn't sure if Brianna would even come over to join us. What I really needed was to be away from my family so they didn't see I was upset. I wasn't sure why, though. This was a miracle for Amos. In the back of my mind, I could still hear Alexa's words. I'm afraid she would never accept you in my dad's life. Brianna never showed up for the Christmas Eve meal. In fact, Amos and Alexa didn't return either. My family continued our Christmas Eve activities as normal, which consisted of Christmas carols and lots of loud conversations among the adults. No one brought up Amos to me, and I was thankful for that. I wasn't sure if I could keep it together. Despite Amos's absence, Douglas fit right in and didn't appear affected by his missing grandpa and mom. I had a feeling it was better for him to not have any family drama mess with his Christmas Eve. The boy had obviously been through a lot this past year with his parents' divorce. I poured the gumbos into storage containers and packed up enough to bring to Amos and his girls. Poor man didn't get to finish his meal. I was worried about what was going on next door. Why did Brianna show up all of a sudden with no warning? Maybe it was her intention to surprise her dad. Of course, she had no idea about me and the planned blended family celebration. After Lisa left around 9 o'clock to put her sleepy kids to bed, Douglas and I walked over to his grandpa's house. The automatic timer had turned the Christmas lights on. Douglas stopped walking halfway and peered up at the lights. He perked up and pointed towards the house. "Wow! Look at the lights!" I squeezed his shoulder. "Your grandpa put those up for you." When I rang the doorbell, Amos answered, his face haggard. "Eugeena, thanks for bringing Douglas. It was good for him to be with you for a bit." I tried to give Amos my best reassuring smile, although I was feeling torn up inside. "Not a problem. I believe Douglas is tuckered out from the day." The little boy beamed at his grandfather. "Grandpa, the lights. I love them." Amos grinned back. "Glad you liked them, buddy. Say good night to Miss Eugeena." The sleepy-eyed boy peered up at me. "Good night. I had a lot of fun today, Miss Eugeena." "Good night. I'll see you tomorrow for Christmas dinner." He frowned. "Will you have macaroni and cheese?" "I sure will." He grinned. "Cool." Douglas slipped past his grandpa. I extended the bag I had towards Amos. Here's some gumbo. I don't think you finished your meal." Amos reached out for the bag. "Thank you, Eugeena. I'm starving." "I will hopefully see you and your girls tomorrow. I look forward to officially meeting Brianna." Amos smiled, though his eyes appeared sad. He grabbed my hand and reassured me. "We will be there." "We will be there?" A smile etched across my face until a voice from inside wiped it away. "Is that her?" The voice was harsh and made me cringe on the inside. I observed Amos, who closed his eyes briefly, seeming to grow older in front of my eyes. He opened his eyes and locked on mine as if to express his apologies. "Well, invite her in. I want to meet this woman, too." This woman? This youngin', even if she was Amos's daughter, was downright rude. I squared my shoulders back, and I slipped past Amos before he could protest. My eyes were drawn to the Christmas tree that was lit up in the corner. Then I turned to face the couch where Alexa sat. She looked nervously at me, with her hands in her lap. I watched as she looked back and forth from me to the other woman sitting on the couch. Brianna sat, her dreadlocks pulled back from her face, her eyes glaring at me. I glared back. Yes, I did. Lord help me, but I was feeling some kind of way right now. I knew Brianna was in pain, but that was no reason for her to be rude at her age. She was an adult acting like a sullen teenager. Alexa jumped from the couch. "I'm going to help Douglas get ready for bed." As she walked by me, she started to reach out to touch my arm, but seemed to think better of it. Once she was out of the room, I felt Amos at my side. I stopped my staring match with Brianna and looked up at Amos. He didn't need me acting up too. With a deep sigh and a quick prayer, I addressed Brianna, keeping my tone light despite the growing tension in my body. "It's good to meet you, Brianna." She didn't say a word, but she did break her stare. "My dad said you all were getting married." "When?" I tried to take this as a good sign that she was interested. "Next summer. We talked about June. We would love to have you." "I don't need to be at your wedding," Brianna broke in. "I just wanted to meet you, to see who my dad moved on with." Amos spoke up, his tone sharp with frustration. "Your mother has been gone 3 years, Brianna. She will always be a part of me, and I told you, I'm here for you. I have tried to reach out to you." "Are you really here for me?" Brianna spat out. "You were never there when I was younger. You were barely there when Mom was sick. Now you don't have any of us around, so you just moved on with your life." Brianna's tone made me flinch. Amos cleared his throat. "I didn't handle a lot of things the right way. Yes, I worked, and I got caught up in my caseloads, but I always been here to make sure you had what you needed. You have been ignoring me all this time." Amos's voice was strained. He wasn't the kind of man who got loud, but he was straining to keep his voice under control. I didn't know what to do with this back and forth between Amos and his disgruntled daughter. I really felt like they should be talking to each other without my presence. They had a lot to work through, and unfortunately, Christmas Eve may not be enough time to do it. I interrupted the banter. "It sounds like you two have a lot to talk about. Amos probably told you, but I'm having Christmas dinner at my house. I know I have some of your favorites. You're welcome to come and meet my family." I started to turn away, but then felt like there was more to say. "We have all suffered loss. When you all moved here, my husband had just passed away. It's been hard during the holidays the past few years. Our family is not perfect either. Still, when we lose someone, this is the time of year to remember the ones we lost and to enjoy each other. Amos can't replace my children's father, and I'm not even trying to replace your mother. But Amos and I are going to grow old together, and we want our families to make new memories. My family loves your dad. He's a good guy. Give him a chance." Brianna looked at me. Her mouth twitched as she wanted to say something. I noticed her eyes were wet. She jumped up from the couch and stomped away. "I don't know why I came here. Everyone wants to just move on. Well, I can't. This is not how it's supposed to be," Amos shouted. "Brianna!" His daughter retreated upstairs, not bothering to turn around. I reached out and grabbed Amos's hand. "Let her go. She's processing a lot being back in this house." I looked down at the bag. "Let's heat up some food for you." I followed Amos back toward his kitchen with Brianna's words in my head. This is not how it's supposed to be. In the recesses of my mind, while I never made friends with Francine Jones, mother to mother, I knew she wanted her husband and girls to be happy. Amos sat at the kitchen table looking lost. As I heated up the gumbo for him, I prayed for the joy of Christmas and a mother's love to radiate in this house. Chapter 7. Christmas Day. I awoke early, but not earlier than the children in the house. Both twins had beat me and their parents downstairs. I arrived in the living room and sent them both back upstairs to wash their faces and brush their teeth. I started a pot of coffee and was staring out the kitchen window when the doorbell rang. I wasn't surprised to see Amos when I opened the door. He looked like me, like he hadn't slept. "Merry Christmas." I opened the door wider for him to step inside. Once inside, I closed the door, trepidation rising in my stomach. "Everything okay this morning?" With a slight nod of his head and a faint smile, he said, "Merry Christmas to you. I didn't want to disturb your family time." He leaned towards me. I reached for him and pulled him into a tight hug. "We are family." I remembered my conversation with my aunts earlier in the week. "It'll be all right. We knew that all wouldn't be perfect. I'm just happy both your girls are in town." He hugged me back just as fiercely. "I'm sorry. Brianna is..." He stepped back and rubbed his hands across his bald head as if he could rub his thoughts away. "I'm happy she's here, but..." I ran my hand down his arm. She's not exuding the holiday spirit. Give her time. The invitation is open and there's plenty of food. I heard a car door slam outside and peeped out the side window. Lisa and her crew had arrived. I opened the door, thankful to be greeted by warm hugs and squeals from my grandkids. Soon, the doorbell rang again. Alexa and Douglas joined the growing crowd in the living room. I sauntered off to the kitchen to prepare today's meal. Soon, Judy, Carmen, Lisa, and Alexa joined me in the kitchen. I was appreciative for the help because I was already tired due to the lack of sleep. I wanted to ask Alexa how her sister was doing, but kept my pace with the dishes instead. I like to serve Christmas dinner by noon. I prayed that Brianna would join us. My aunts, Esther and Cora, arrived. I asked Cora to set the dining room, and I took a moment to leave the kitchen, not only to catch my breath. It was hot in there. I also wanted to take in my home. Since Ralph died and all the children had left, I spent so much time in this home by myself. It was a sight to see all my family, as well as Amos and his family. The scene reminded me of my childhood, when my large family had flocked to my grandmother's house for the holidays. Here I was, some 50 years later, in the role of the family matriarch. "Mama, are you okay?" I looked to see Lisa standing beside me, looking concerned. I smiled and wiped my eyes. I hadn't realized my eyes had watered. "I'm good. Just happy." Lisa and I weren't huggers, but she reached over and hugged me. That made me want to be more emotional. But I kept it together. I pulled away. "Let's start moving the food to the table." When the clock struck 12, the children were squirming and whining for food at the smaller table in the corner. The adults had seated themselves and weren't doing much better than the children. This was the official first meal of the day for most of us. Amos helped carry the turkey to the table. I followed behind him with the carving utensils. I noticed the open seat across from Alexa. I sat Amos down at the head of the table with both daughters on either side of him. I'd hoped that Brianna would have made her way over to the house by now. I took my seat at the head of the table, opposite Amos, who stood waiting for me. The last few Christmases, Amos said the grace, since he was technically the eldest male in attendance. A quiet grew over the table, as everyone realized it was indeed time to bless the food. I reached for Lisa and Cora's hands, who were on either side of me, and I beckoned to the children to hold hands before Amos started. But before Amos began his prayer, the doorbell rang. I peered up at him and then said, "Hold on, folks. Let me see who's at the door." When I opened the door, Brianna stood looking down at the porch. She lifted her eyes to meet mine, and I smiled at her. "You're just in time. Your dad was about to say grace. Let me get your coat for you." Brianna slowly stepped inside, as though she couldn't believe she was actually here. I didn't want to make this more awkward, so I said, "Follow me. The dining room is this way." I walked into the dining room, and everyone turned towards the door. Brianna looked a little bit petrified at first, probably not realizing how large my family was going to be. I motioned to her. "Brianna, we have a seat for you across from your sister." Once Brianna was seated, I nodded towards Amos. He nodded back, his eyes shining. I knew it took everything in him to hold his tears back. Hands were connected again as we waited for Amos to pray. His words came out hoarse, with emotion at first. "Lord, we thank you for this Christmas day, the day we celebrate the birth of your Son. We're grateful to you for bringing our Savior into this world, born in a manger, able to relate to us in our human skin. We're grateful for the gift of your Son. This Christmas, we're especially thankful for the gift of family. We want to acknowledge the family we lost, knowing that they're with you right now. Thank you for the memories and the opportunity to fellowship with loved ones today. Thank you for the cooks and for this food we're about to eat, for the nourishment of our bodies. We ask all of these things in Jesus' name. Amen." Amen. With that, Food was passed around and conversations rose and fell around the clicks of utensils on the plates. I kept peeking at Amos, who was smiling more than I had seen him in days. Brianna's face was not as preserved as last night, but she seemed to be talking to her sister and also conversing with Carmen and Judy. After the last of the dinner dishes had been squared away in the dishwasher, I looked up to see Brianna had joined me in the kitchen. She seemed shy and not at all like the belligerent young woman I stared down last night. How was everything, Brianna? I hope I was able to add a few of your favorites. It was good, thank you. I don't remember the last time I've had a good home-cooked meal. Wow, I'm thankful you could join us for Christmas. She nodded. I wanted to apologize for last night. I thought about things after you left. Her voice caught. She twisted her hands together. My mom would have wanted my dad and us to be happy. She talked about that all the time before she passed. She looked at me, her eyes bright. Dad seems happy. We talked last night for a long time. I see you have a big family. All of you have been really nice. Anyway, I just wanted to say I'm sorry and that this has been the best Christmas I've had in a long time. I squeezed my own hands together. I'm happy to hear that. I bet your mom's smiling down on you right now, too, knowing that your family is together for Christmas. Brianna nodded. Yes, it's good to be here in Charleston. I've talked to Alexa. We're going to visit my mom's grave. That's a good idea. Thanks again. Brianna left, and a few minutes later, Amos showed in the kitchen, dressed in his coat. I smiled at him. Are you going with the girls? Yes, we will ride out to the cemetery. We will be back. No hurries. Enjoy your girls. I'm happy they're both here. Amos and I shared a hug. Long after he left, I stared out the kitchen window, still reveling in the warmth of our embrace. All the puzzle pieces were finally coming together. I peered down at the diamond that sparkles on my right ring finger and smiled. A miracle had happened. Author's note. When I finished writing Lemonfield Disaster and realized the direction Eugeena and Amos were going with their relationship, it occurred to me that something was missing. I knew Eugeena would have this same feeling. Of course, she's inside my head all the time, constantly being bossy, especially when I'm working on another book. Series. LOL. Over the course of 3 books, readers have had a chance to get to know Eugeena and her family, but there has been a bit of mystery around Amos. He's a great guy, and now, with this expanded role in Eugeena's life, as her soon-to-be second husband, it felt more crucial than ever that I stopped to give readers a peek inside Amos's family dynamics. I hope you enjoyed my first Christmas story. I'm looking forward to Eugeena's world continuing to expand and for her future adventures as an amateur sleuth. Thank you for embracing this character and your book reviews. I'm so appreciative for the feedback. This has been A Blended Family Christmas, a short story. Eugeena Patterson, short book number 2. Written by Tyora Moody. Narrated by Diana Rhodes. Copyright 2019 by Tyora Moody. Production copyright by Tim Publishing, LLC.